I've always been a man of routine. Wake up at 6 a.m., brew a pot of coffee strong enough to wake a coma patient, and head to the construction site where I manage a crew of guys who'd rather trade insults than swing hammers. My wife, Emily, was the softness to my rough edges. Blonde curls that bounced when she laughed, green eyes that could melt steel, and a voice that sounded like honey dripping over warm bread. We'd been married 12 years, and I thought I knew her like the back of my calloused hand. That was my first mistake. It started with the little things. She'd linger in the bathroom longer than usual, the faint glow of her phone screen peeking under the door. She'd hum to herself while cooking dinner, some tune I didn't recognize, her fingers tapping the counter like she was keeping time to a secret rhythm. I'd ask, "What's that song?" And she'd shrug, "Oh, just something I heard somewhere." I didn't push it. Why would I? Trust was the foundation we'd built, or so I thought. Then came the late nights. She'd say she was meeting her friend Sarah for drinks. Girls' night, she called it. I'd nod, kiss her forehead, and settle into the couch with a beer and whatever game was on. She'd come home smelling faintly of lavender and something sharper, like citrus and spice, a scent I couldn't place. "Sarah got a new perfume," she'd say, and I'd grunt, too tired to question it. But the nights stretched longer, and the excuses grew thinner. One evening, I noticed her car wasn't parked where it usually was when she got back, just a block over, like she didn't want me to hear the engine. I'm not a paranoid guy. I don't snoop through drawers or check phones. But something gnawed at me, a splinter under my skin I couldn't dig out. So one Thursday, when she said she'd be out late again, I decided to test the waters. "Tell Sarah hi," I said, casual as could be. She froze for a split second, her smile tightening, then nodded and grabbed her purse. That pause, it was the first crack in the dam. I waited 10 minutes after she left, then grabbed my keys. I drove to the bar she always mentioned, O'Malley's, a dimly lit joint downtown with sticky floors and overpriced whiskey. Her car wasn't in the lot. I circled the block, then the next, my pulse ticking up with every empty space. Finally, I spotted it, her silver Honda, parked outside a sleek high-rise condo building 3 miles from O'Malley's. My stomach twisted. I pulled over, cut the engine, and sat there, staring at that car like it was a stranger wearing my wife's face. I don't know how long I sat in my truck, the dashboard clock blurring into a meaningless glow. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been an hour. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, and my breath fogged the windshield in short, angry bursts. That building, glass and steel, all modern angles and money, didn't belong in Emily's world. Our world was split-level houses, chipped paint, and backyard barbecues. Who did she know here? I stepped out, the cold March air slapping my face, and walked toward the entrance. The lobby was locked, a keypad glowing beside the door. I didn't have a code, but I had a hunch. I pulled out my phone and texted her, "How's girls' night?" My thumb hovered over the send button, then pressed it. I watched the screen. Delivered. Read. No reply. My chest tightened. Through the glass, I saw a security guard at a desk, flipping through a magazine. I knocked, and he glanced up, bored. "Resident?" he asked through the intercom. "No, visiting," I said, forcing a smile. "Who?" I blanked. "Sarah," I blurted, hoping it'd stick. He raised an eyebrow, then waved me off. "Call up. I don't buzz strangers." I nodded, retreating to the shadows, my mind racing. That's when I saw him. A guy stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored coat that screamed cash. Dark hair slicked back, a smirk playing on his lips like he owned the world. He carried a takeout bag, the kind from that fancy Italian place Emily loved but we could never afford. My gut screamed it before my brain caught up. I ducked behind a pillar as he exited, heading straight for her car. He didn't get in. He leaned against it, pulled out his phone, and typed something. A minute later, Emily appeared. She walked out of that building like she belonged there, her coat unbuttoned, her hair loose and wild. She smiled at him. Not the polite smile she gave the mailman, but something warm, alive, intimate. My throat closed up. They didn't touch, not yet, but the way he handed her that bag, the way she laughed and tilted her head, it was a dance I'd never seen her do with me. They climbed into her car, and I watched it pull away, taillights fading into the night. I drove home in a daze, the road blurring into streaks of light and shadow. My hands shook, not from cold but from something darker, something that coiled in my chest and wouldn't let go. Emily with that guy, his smug face, her easy laugh, played on a loop in my head. I didn't know his name, but I knew his type. Rich, polished, the kind of man who'd never swung a hammer or scraped mud off his boots. What did she see in him? What couldn't she find in me? When I got home, the house felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty. Her coffee mug sat on the counter, lipstick smudged on the rim, a silent accusation. I poured a whiskey, then another, letting the burn drown the questions. She texted me around midnight. Staying at Sarah's? Too much wine. See you tomorrow. I stared at those words until they didn't make sense anymore. Sarah. The lie was so thin I could see through it, but I didn't call her out. Not yet. The next morning, she came home, all bright eyes and apologies. Sarah's couch is awful, she said, stretching dramatically. Missed our bed. I nodded, sipping my coffee, watching her move through the kitchen like nothing had changed. But everything had. I saw it now. The way she avoided my gaze, the way her fingers fidgeted with her necklace, a silver chain I hadn't bought her. Rough night? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Oh, girl talk, she said, waving a hand. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. That day I started digging. I wasn't a detective, but I had time and a sick kind of patience. I checked her car when she was in the shower. Nothing obvious, no receipts or stray cufflinks. But the mileage didn't match her story. O'Malley's was 6 miles round trip. Her odometer showed 20. I went through her purse next, feeling like a thief in my own house. Lipstick, keys, a crumpled tissue, and a business card. Nathaniel Pierce, attorney at law, it read, with an address matching that condo building. My blood turned to ice. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed proof, something solid to hold on to when the storm hit. So I waited, watched, let her think I was the same old clueless husband. She kept up the act, dinners, small talk, even curling up next to me on the couch. But I felt the distance, the invisible wall she'd built. And every time she left for girls' night, I followed. Tailing Emily became my second job. I'd park a block away from that condo, slouched low in my truck, a baseball cap pulled over my eyes. She'd show up around 8 p.m., always alone, always in that same silver Honda. Nathaniel would meet her outside, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with that damn takeout bag. They'd disappear inside, and I'd wait, counting the minutes until she left. Usually around 1 a.m., her hair mussed, her steps lighter than they ever were at home. I started taking pictures. Not for evidence, not really, just to prove to myself it wasn't a dream. My phone filled up with blurry shots. Her laughing with him, his hand brushing her arm, their silhouettes in the lobby. Each one carved a little deeper into me, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know everything, how long, how often, why. I even tracked down Nathaniel online. Big shot lawyer. Divorced, no kids. A penthouse in that building worth more than my house and truck combined. He had a slick website, all smiles and promises, and I hated him more with every click. One night I got bold. She'd left her phone on the counter while she showered, and I grabbed it. Passcode was still our anniversary. Ironic. Huh? I scrolled her texts. Sarah's name popped up, but the messages were vague. See you tonight. Had fun last time. Then I found Nate. No last name, just Nate. Can't wait to see you, he'd written 2 days ago. Wear that dress I like. Her reply, only if you behave. My vision tunneled. I put the phone back before she noticed, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I started losing sleep. I'd lie next to her, listening to her breathe, wondering how she could sleep so peacefully with that double life ticking away inside her. I'd imagine confronting her, yelling, smashing something, watching her squirm. But I didn't. I kept quiet, building my case, letting the anger simmer into something colder. sharper. Revenge wasn't a word I used yet, but it was there, lurking, waiting for its moment. Then came the night that broke me. I followed her again, same routine, but this time they didn't go inside. They drove off together in his car, a black BMW that purred like money. I tailed them, keeping my distance, until they pulled into a motel lot 10 miles out of town. Cheap neon sign, flickering vacancy. They parked, and I watched them walk in, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. My wife, my Emily, stepping into a room with him like it was nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my truck outside that motel until dawn, the engine off, the windows fogging with my breath. They came out at 6 a.m., her smoothing her hair, him adjusting his tie like he had a board meeting to get to. She kissed him, quick but deliberate, then slid into her car and drove off. He left in his BMW, and I just sat there, numb, the world tilting under me. 12 years of marriage, and she was giving pieces of herself to him in a place that smelled like stale cigarettes and regret. When I got home, she was already there, frying eggs like it was any other morning. "You're up early," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Couldn't sleep?" I muttered, pouring coffee I didn't want. She hummed that tune again, and I realized it wasn't random. It was his song, some melody he'd planted in her head. I gripped the mug so hard my knuckles ached. "You okay?" she asked, all innocent concern. "Fine," I lied, and she didn't push it. That's when I decided. No more watching, no more waiting. I wasn't going to let this eat me alive. I was going to take it back, all of it, and make them feel what I felt. But it had to be perfect. Cruel, yes, but precise. Something that'd leave scars deeper than anything physical. I started planning. First, I needed more on Nathaniel. I called a buddy, Mike, who'd done some shady work back in the day, nothing illegal, just resourceful. "Need dirt on a lawyer," I said. "Name's Nathaniel Pierce." Mike didn't ask why. "Gimme a week," he said. While Mike dug, I kept up the charade at home. I smiled, kissed her cheek, asked about her day. She'd ramble about work or Sarah, and I'd nod, filing every word away. I even started leaving little traps, mentioning O'Malley's casually, watching her flinch, or asking about that necklace, seeing her fumble for an answer. She didn't suspect a thing. Meanwhile, I shadowed Nathaniel myself. His office downtown, his gym, his favorite coffee spot. I learned his rhythm, his weaknesses. Mike called back 6 days later. "Your guy's a piece of work," he said. "Embezzled from a client 2 years ago, covered it up with a settlement. Bar association never caught wind, but the paper trail's there if you know where to look. Also, he's got a gambling habit. Owes some rough people downtown." I thanked him, my mind already spinning. Nathaniel wasn't just a snake. He was a house of cards waiting to fall. And Emily? She'd picked the wrong man to dance with. Knowledge is a weapon, and I was arming myself to the teeth. Mike's intel on Nathaniel Pierce lit a fire under me. Embezzlement, gambling debts, a polished facade hiding a rotting core. I could have gone straight for his throat, leaked those files to the bar association, or tipped off his creditors. But that was too quick, too clean. I wanted him to squirm, to feel the walls closing in, and I wanted Emily to watch it happen. She'd chosen him, built this secret life with him, and I'd make sure it crumbled in her hands. I started small. Nathaniel's office was in a glass tower downtown, all sleek lines and ego. I'd park across the street, sipping coffee, watching him strut out at lunch, always with a different client. Older men in suits, women with tight smiles. One day, I followed him to a dive bar 2 blocks over, a place called the Rusty Anchor. Not his usual scene. He met a guy there, short, stocky, with a scar running down his cheek like a cracked windshield. They didn't shake hands. Nathaniel slid an envelope across the table. Scarface pocketed it and left. Gambling payoff, I figured. I snapped a photo, blurry but usable. Emily noticed me pulling away. "You're quiet lately," she said one night, stirring soup on the stove. "Work's heavy?" I lied, staring at the steam rising from my mug. She nodded, but her eyes lingered, searching for something I wasn't ready to show. I kept my routine: home by 6, dinner by 7, TV till 10. But my mind was elsewhere, plotting. I'd started a notebook, hidden under the workbench in the garage. Dates, times, license plates, Nathaniel's habits. It wasn't just evidence. It was a map to their ruin. Then came the real people. I'd seen Sarah, actual Sarah, at the grocery store, her cart full of diapers and baby food. She waved, all tired smiles, and I asked, casual as could be, "How's girls' night been?" She frowned. "What girls' night? I haven't seen Emily outside work in months." My stomach dropped, but I kept my face neutral. "Oh, must have mixed it up," I said, and she shrugged, oblivious. That was the moment I knew Emily's lies weren't just holes. They were a canyon. I dug deeper. Her phone was a goldmine when she left it unguarded. More texts to Nate. Plans for dinners, weekends away she'd never mentioned. One read, "Missed you at the lake last week." The lake. Our lake. Where we'd spent our 5th anniversary fishing and laughing under the stars. She'd taken him there. I closed the phone, my hands trembling, and poured another whiskey. The betrayal wasn't just in her actions. It was in the memories she'd given him, pieces of us she'd handed over like they meant nothing. I needed allies, people who'd help without asking too many questions. Mike was one, but I brought in Tony, a site foreman with a knack for bending rules. Tony was a big guy, 6'4", hands like sledgehammers, and a grin that could charm or terrify depending on the day. "What's the play?" he asked over beers at my place. Emily out on another girls' night. I laid it out. Nathaniel's debts, Emily's double life, my need for something sharp and lasting. "No blood," I said. "Just pain." Tony nodded, slow and thoughtful. "I know a guy," he said, "owes me a favor." Tony's guy was Victor, a wiry little man with darting eyes and a voice like gravel. We met in a diner off the highway, booths sticky with grease, air thick with coffee and cigarette ghosts. Victor ran a side gig, fake documents, untraceable calls, the kind of stuff that skirts the law without breaking it. "You want leverage," he said, chewing a toothpick. "I can get you into his world. Bank records, emails, whatever's buried." I slid him Nathaniel's name and a wad of cash. "Make it quick," I said. He smirked. "Always is." Victor delivered 3 days later. A USB drive dropped in my mailbox. No note. I plugged it into my laptop in the garage, the hum of the fridge masking the silence. Files spilled out. Nathaniel's gambling ledgers, coded but clear enough. Thousands owed to a crew downtown. Payments late, interest piling up. There were emails too, cocky exchanges with clients he'd overbilled. A mistress before Emily he'd paid off to vanish. The guy was a house fire waiting for a match. I burned a copy and hid it in the toolbox, my ace in the hole. Emily came home that night, humming again, her purse slung over her shoulder like a trophy. "Good time?" I asked, flipping channels. "Yeah, Sarah's hilarious," she said, kicking off her shoes. I smiled, picturing Sarah juggling diapers while Emily spun her lies. I didn't call her out. Instead, I watched her climb the stairs, her hips swaying, and wondered how she'd look when the truth hit. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was an architect, building their downfall brick by brick. Tony checked in the next day. "Victor's good, but we need a hook," he said. "Something to reel him in." I thought about the lake, the motel, the way Nathaniel strutted like he was untouchable. "He's got ego," I said, "and she's got guilt. We use both." Tony grinned. "Now you're talking." We started sketching it out, nothing final, just bones. But it felt right, like a blade sharpening itself. The plan took shape over beers and late-night garage sessions. Tony brought muscle and ideas. Victor brought the shadows. We'd hit Nathaniel where it hurt. His reputation, his wallet, his pride, and drag Emily into the mess so she couldn't look away. First step, the gambling crew. Victor knew them, small-time enforcers, rough but not reckless, led by a guy called Dino. "Dino's reasonable," Victor said, twirling that toothpick. "For a price." I didn't care about reasonable. I wanted results. We met Dino in a warehouse off the interstate, crates stacked high, air smelling of oil and rust. He was bald, barrel-chested, with a gold chain that gleamed against his tan skin. "Heard you got a problem with a lawyer," he said, lighting a cigar. "He owes you money," I replied, sliding him a printout from Victor's files. "Nathaniel's debt, $80,000 and climbing." Dino puffed smoke, eyes narrowing. "And you're what, the Good Samaritan?" I leaned in. "I'm the guy who'll point you at him. No strings." He grinned, teeth yellowed but sharp. "Deal." I fed Dino just enough: Nathaniel's schedule, his habits, the condo address. Let him think it was about the cash. He didn't need to know about Emily, not yet. Meanwhile, I worked her side. I started dropping hints, subtle but pointed. "Saw a BMW like that lawyer's today," I'd say over dinner, watching her fork pause midair. "Fancy cars, fancy lies, huh?" She'd laugh, too quick, and change the subject. I was planting seeds, letting her wonder how much I knew. Victor hacked Nathaniel's email next. A fake client invite to a high-stakes poker game downtown. The kind he couldn't resist. Dino's crew ran it, and I made sure the buy-in was steep. Nathaniel RSVP'd within hours, cocky as ever. I pictured him there, sweating under the lights, losing more than he could afford, Dino's boys circling like sharks. It wasn't enough to break him, but it'd rattle him, make him sloppy. And sloppy was where I'd thrive. Emily sensed something off. "You're different," she said one morning, pouring orange juice. "Distracted." I shrugged. "Just thinking." She pressed, her voice softer. "About what?" I met her eyes, those green pools I'd once drowned in, and said, "Trust." She blinked, then smiled, but it wobbled. I let it hang there, a guillotine blade she didn't see falling. The poker game went down on a Friday. I didn't watch, didn't need to. Dino called me after, voice rough with amusement. "Your boy's in deep." Dropped 20 grand, begged for credit. We gave it to him. I smirked into the phone. Keep him on the hook. Nathaniel's debt was ballooning, and Dino's crew wasn't the forgiving type. I wanted him desperate, clawing at walls that wouldn't hold. Emily came home late that night, her usual glow dimmed. "Rough day?" I asked. "Yeah," she muttered, avoiding me. I wondered if he'd called her, whining about his losses. Good. Victor upped the ante. He forged a letter from Nathaniel's firm. Disciplinary review, vague but ominous, hinting at financial irregularities. Mailed it to his office, not the condo, so his partners would see it first. I imagined him opening it, that smirk wiped clean, his perfect world cracking. Meanwhile, I leaned on Emily harder. I left the business card, Nathaniel Pierce, attorney at law, on the kitchen counter one morning, no explanation. She found it when I was at work, texted me, "Where'd this come from?" I replied, "Found it in the car." "Yours." Radio silence for hours. When she got home, she was a mess. Hair pulled back, eyes red like she'd been crying. "We need to talk," she said, voice trembling. I braced myself, ready for the confession, but she pivoted. "Work's stressful. I might take a few days off." I nodded, playing along. "Sure. Relax." She didn't know I'd seen her with him the night before, parked outside his condo, arguing in her car. He gestured wildly. She'd shaken her head. The pressure was building, and I was the one turning the screws. Tony suggested the next move. "Hit his ego," he said. "Publicly." We brainstormed a fake award, some glitzy lawyer gala, but twisted. Victor mocked up a flyer. Nathaniel Pierce, honored for integrity. Set for a date 2 weeks out. We'd plaster it online, tag his firm, let his peers RSVP. Then, at the event, we'd expose him, debts, lies, the works, live for everyone to see. "And her?" Tony asked. "She'll be there," I said. "Front row." I tested her again that weekend. "Heard about some lawyer getting an award," I said, flipping pancakes. "Pierce, I think." "Know him?" Her spatula clattered to the counter. "No," she snapped, too fast. "Why would I?" I shrugged. "Dunno." Name sounded familiar. She didn't speak for the rest of breakfast, her silence louder than any lie. I had her cornered, and she didn't even know it yet. Nathaniel's spiral was picking up speed. Dino texted me grainy photos, him at the poker table, eyes wild, stacks of chips gone. Another showed him outside the condo, arguing with Scarface, who loomed over him like a storm cloud. "He's late again," Dino said. "Won't be pretty." I didn't care about pretty, I cared about broken. At home, Emily was unraveling too. She'd stopped humming, stopped smiling. Her phone glued to her hand like a lifeline. I'd catch her staring at it, waiting for him to fix whatever mess he'd made. The fake award flyer went live. Victor posted it on legal forums, X even sent it to Nathaniel's firm email list. "Join us to celebrate Nathaniel Pierce's exemplary career." It read, all pomp and promise. RSVPs poured in, colleagues, rivals, clients. I booked a banquet hall under a shell name, paid cash, and told Tony to handle security. "No cameras," I said. "Just witnesses." He grinned. "This is gonna be biblical." I invited Emily myself, casual as could be. "Got tickets to some fancy event," I said over dinner. "Lawyer thing. Thought we'd go together. Shake things up." She paled. "When?" "2 weeks," I said, watching her squirm. I might be busy," she stammered. "Cancel," I said, firm but calm. "It'll be good for us." She nodded, reluctant, and I knew she'd be there, tethered to me while her world burned. Victor pulled one more trick, hacked Nathaniel's phone, sent Emily a text from his number. "Need you now." Falling apart. She left 10 minutes later, claiming a work emergency. I followed, saw her pull into his condo, rush inside. Through the lobby glass, I watched them, him pacing, her grabbing his arms, both shouting. She stayed an hour, came out crying. I drove home, let her think she'd fooled me again. The night before the gala, I finalized it. Dino's crew would crash it, demanding payment in front of everyone. Victor had the embezzlement files queued on a projector, dates, amounts, client names. Tony would block the exits. And Emily? She'd see it all. Her lover exposed, humiliated, chased out of his perfect life. With me beside her, the husband she'd underestimated. It wasn't just revenge, it was a reckoning. The day of the gala arrived. A crisp March evening that felt heavier than it should. I'd spent the morning in the garage triple-checking everything. Victor's files, Tony's logistics, Dino's promise to show. Emily was a ghost around the house, flitting between rooms, her phone buzzing nonstop. She'd barely slept, dark circles framing those green eyes I used to love. "You sure about tonight?" she asked, tugging at her necklace. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, smiling like it was nothing. She didn't smile back. I picked her outfit, a black dress she'd worn to our 10th anniversary dinner, elegant but tight, a reminder of what we'd been. "You look good," I told her, and she nodded, distracted, her mind already elsewhere. We drove to the banquet hall in silence, my truck rumbling through the streets, her fingers twisting in her lap. The place was a mid-tier venue, chandeliers, white tablecloths, a stage with a screen. Guests milled around, lawyers in suits, wives in pearls, all chattering about Nathaniel Pierce, the man of the hour. Tony met us at the door, playing usher, his bulk filling the frame. "Front row's yours," he said, winking at me. Emily frowned but followed, her heels clicking on the tile. We sat, her leg brushing mine, and I felt the tension radiating off her. The room filled fast, 50, 60 people, maybe more. Nathaniel arrived late, strutting in with that tailored coat, his smirk intact but frayed at the edges. He didn't see us at first, too busy shaking hands, soaking up the praise. Then his eyes landed on Emily. He froze, just for a second, and I saw the question flicker across his face. She looked away, gripping her clutch like a lifeline. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight hit the stage. A hired MC, some actor Victor found, took the mic. "Welcome to the celebration of Nathaniel Pierce's integrity and excellence." Applause rippled through the crowd. Nathaniel stood, waving, all charm and confidence. I leaned toward Emily. "He's something, huh?" She swallowed hard, nodding faintly. The MC rambled on, piling compliments so thick they sounded hollow. I watched Nathaniel's chest puff up, oblivious to the trap snapping shut. Then the screen flickered. The MC stepped aside, and Victor's handiwork took over. A slideshow, crisp and damning. First slide, Nathaniel Pierce, a career in numbers. Then the numbers, $80,000 owed to Dino's crew, $200,000 siphoned from clients, dates and account numbers in black and white. Gasps rippled through the room. Nathaniel's smile vanished, his face paling as he stumbled toward the stage. "This is a mistake," he shouted. But the screen kept rolling emails, threats from his mistress, a photo of him with Scarface at the rusty anchor. The room erupted. Lawyers whispered, wives clutched their pearls, and Nathaniel flailed like a drowning man. "Turn it off," he yelled, lunging for the projector. But Tony was there, a wall of muscle blocking his path. Emily shrank beside me, her breath shallow, her hand clawing at my arm. "What's happening?" she whispered, voice trembling. I turned to her, calm as stone. "Just watch." Dino's crew burst in right on cue. 4 of them, led by Dino himself, gold chain glinting under the chandelier. "Pierce!" he bellowed, voice cutting through the chaos. "Time's up." They stormed the stage, Dino grabbing Nathaniel by the collar, dragging him center. The crowd parted, some fleeing, others gawking. "You think you can stiff me?" Dino snarled, shoving him. Nathaniel stammered, I'll pay, I swear." Dino laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and tossed him to Scarface, who pinned his arms. The screen looped now, Victor's masterpiece. Every dirty secret Nathaniel thought he'd buried, flashing for his peers to see. A partner from his firm stood, red-faced, shouting, "You're finished, Pierce." Clients muttered about lawsuits, their trust in ashes. Emily whimpered, "No, no, no," her nails digging into me. I pried her hand off, leaned close. "You know him, don't you?" Her eyes widened, wet with panic, but she didn't answer. She didn't have to. Dino's boys weren't gentle. They didn't hit him, nothing so crude, but they stripped him down, metaphorically and almost literally. Scarface yanked off Nathaniel's coat, tossing it into the crowd, while Dino read aloud from the debt ledger, each figure a nail in his coffin. 80 grand, plus interest. "Where's my money, lawyer?" Nathaniel begged, voice cracking, but the room had turned. Colleagues who'd clapped for him minutes ago now filmed it, phones out, immortalizing his fall. I stood, pulling Emily up with me. "Let's get a better view," I said, guiding her toward the stage. She resisted, but I was stronger, my grip iron on her wrist. We stopped 10 feet from Nathaniel, close enough to smell his sweat, see the terror in his eyes as Dino loomed over him. "Recognize her?" I called, loud enough for him to hear. He looked at Emily, then me, and the realization hit, a freight train of dread. "You," he rasped, but Dino cut him off with a shove. Emily sobbed, "Please stop." But I held her there, forcing her to face it. The revenge wasn't just Nathaniel's. It was hers too, and I'd woven her into it tighter than she'd ever imagined. As Dino's crew humiliated him, I turned to the crowd, raising my voice. "This man's been living a lie, and he didn't do it alone." Murmurs spread, heads swiveling. Emily froze, her sobs choking off. I pulled out my phone, flicked to a photo, her and Nathaniel at the motel, his arm around her, time-stamped. I handed it to Tony, who passed it to the MC. Up it went on the screen, larger than life. The room went silent, then buzzed again. A hornet's nest kicked over. "That's my wife," I said, steady and clear. 12 years, and she picked him. Emily gasped, a sound like she'd been gutted, and tried to bolt. I caught her arm, held her beside me. "No running now," I whispered. Nathaniel stared, slack-jawed, as Dino's crew paused, sensing the shift. "You're a package deal, huh?" Dino said, grinning at Emily. "Guess you're both screwed." She turned to me, tears streaming, voice a broken plea. "Why? Why like this?" I met her gaze, cold and unyielding. "You gave him our lake, our life. This is what you get. The crowd was a jury now, judging her as harshly as him. Whispers of homewrecker, liar, phones snapping her shame. Nathaniel tried to crawl away, but Scarface hauled him back, forcing him to kneel beside her image on the screen. Victor had one last gift. The projector flashed a new slide, texts between them, her words to Nate glowing in the dark. Miss you, love that dress on you, our little secret, each one a dagger, and I watched her flinch with every line. Nathaniel's firm partners stormed out, vowing legal action. Clients followed, their trust shattered. Dino's crew didn't care about her. They wanted cash, but I'd made her collateral damage, her name tied to his ruin. Emily collapsed into a chair, head in her hands, while Nathaniel begged Dino for mercy that wouldn't come. I stood over her, the husband she'd betrayed, and felt nothing. No rage, no pity, just the weight of a plan perfectly executed. You're done too, I said, quiet but final. She looked up, broken, and I walked away, leaving her in the wreckage I'd built. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Nathaniel's firm fired him by morning. Press release, no severance, his office boxed up before he could slink back. Dino's crew didn't let up either. They repoed his BMW that night, left him stranded outside the condo, a shell of the man he'd been. X lit up with the story. Lawyers posting clips, clients raging, hashtags burying him in digital mud. His name was poison now, and I'd poured the first drop. Emily didn't come home. She called once, voice raw, begging to explain. I never meant, she started, but I cut her off. Don't bother. I hung up, blocked her number, and started packing her things. Clothes, jewelry, that necklace I hadn't bought. I didn't burn it, didn't smash it, just boxed it neatly and left it on the porch with a note. Take it and go. She showed up the next day, eyes swollen, and grabbed the boxes without a word. I watched from the window as she drove off, her Honda's taillights fading like a memory I didn't want. Tony and Victor met me for beers after, debriefing the chaos. You see his face when Dino grabbed him? Tony laughed, slapping the table. Priceless. Victor nodded, toothpick rolling. Her too. Didn't expect the wife angle. I shrugged. Had to be both. They didn't ask what came next. Didn't need to. The job was done, the wreckage complete. I paid them, cash in envelopes, and we parted ways, no loose ends. The real cruelty settled in slower, like frost on glass. Nathaniel's gambling debts ballooned. Dino's crew leaned harder. Rumors of broken fingers circling downtown. His condo went up for sale, but no one touched it, not with his name attached. Emily crashed with Sarah. Real Sarah, who'd pieced it together and wasn't thrilled. Work fired her too. The affair leaked, and her boss didn't want the stink. She'd lost her job, her home, her dignity, all because she'd danced with the wrong man. I kept the house, the truck, my crew. Life went back to routine, coffee at 6, sight by 7. But it was sharper now, cleaner. I didn't miss her, not really. The lake stayed mine. I went there alone, fished in silence, let the water wash away her ghost. Friends asked how I was holding up. Fine, I'd say, and they'd nod, sensing the steel beneath it. I'd won, not by keeping her, but by breaking them both. Months later, I saw them, separate, ruined, shadows of who they'd been. Nathaniel at a gas station, pumping fuel into a beat-up sedan, his coat swapped for a stained hoodie. He didn't see me, didn't need to. I saw the slump in his shoulders, the way his hands shook as he counted crumpled bills. Word was he'd lost his license to practice, taken a job bartending at the Rusty Anchor, serving the same guys he'd once paid off. Dino owned him now, a puppet on a string of debt and fear. Emily crossed my path at the grocery store, a chance collision by the canned goods. She looked thinner, her hair dull, her cart holding cheap noodles and a single apple. No ring on her finger. She'd pawned it, I'd heard, along with that necklace. Hey, she said, voice small. I nodded, grabbed my coffee grounds, and kept walking. She didn't follow, didn't beg. Sarah had kicked her out, friends had drifted, and the town whispered her name like a cautionary tale. She'd landed a cashier gig downtown, minimum wage, no future. The revenge wasn't loud or fast. It was a slow bleed, a life sentence of their own making. Nathaniel's pride, Emily's comfort, stripped away piece by piece until they were nothing. I didn't need to lift another finger. The world I'd tilted kept spinning, crushing them under its weight. I'd used real people, Dino, Tony, Victor, even Sarah, to build it, a machine of ruin fueled by their choices and my patience. I sit on my porch now, beer in hand, the March wind cool against my skin. The lake's still there, the house still mine, the crew still loyal. I don't think about her much, or him. Just the night I turned their lies into a spotlight, let the crowd see what they'd hidden. It wasn't about love or hate. It was about justice, cold and cruel, served on my terms. And it felt good, better than I'd ever admit. The story ends here, but the echoes don't. They'll carry it, him pouring shots for men who'd break him, her scanning barcodes in silence. While I keep building, keep living, a man who took back what was his and left them nothing to hold.